And good evening. Thank you for joining us for a special edition of ABC 10 News. I'm Nazi Javid. We have a lot to get to tonight, starting with the Iranian state media confirming the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Tonight, a major escalation in the Middle East. President Trump confirms that Iran's supreme leader indeed was killed in the strikes that the U.S. and Israel carried out Saturday. Khamenei had led the nation for over 30 years, and ABC's Ashan Singh has the latest.
Tonight, President Trump announcing in a social media post that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead, calling him, quote, one of the most evil people in history.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people.
The president adding that just eliminating Iranian leadership will not stop the joint U.S.-Israeli attack, saying what he describes as heavy and pinpoint bombing will continue uninterrupted throughout the week or as long as necessary to achieve our objective. The White House releasing images of the president monitoring the mission from Mar-a-Lago, watching what officials are calling Operation Epic Fury unfold in real time. The daytime assault beginning at 9:45 a.m. Iranian time with a barrage of Tomahawk missiles and for the first time in U.S. combat, one-way drones striking multiple targets in Iran for hours. Buildings and cars in flames. New satellite images showing extensive damage to the supreme leader's compound. Iran responding within hours, launching retaliatory strikes across the region. A barrage of missiles launched into Israel, many intercepted, but some breaking through the air defenses. Iran also targeting at least 4 U.S. bases in the region. Dramatic videos showing strikes near a U.S. naval base in Bahrain, where some 3,200 Americans are stationed. Iranian officials say over 1,000 people were killed in this wave of attacks. So far, no U.S. casualties have been announced. In Israel, at least one person was reported killed, with more than 100 injured. Ashan Singh, ABC News, New York.
And meantime, it comes as Iranian officials say dozens of students at an all-girls elementary school were among those killed during the U.S. and Israeli military strikes across the country. State television and government leaders report 115 people who were at the school were killed. They say nearly 100 more were injured from that strike. And as the world reacts tonight to the strikes on Iran, some anti-war protesters took to the streets in Sacramento, as ABC 10's Gabriel Porras shows us.
The scenes of airstrikes and uncertainty on the streets in the Middle East.
Give me a save!
Leading to this scene on the streets of California's capital.
We are protesting against the war in Iran that just happened this morning.
A group of around 4 dozen walking in the area of 16th and J Streets in downtown Sacramento, many with one message.
We're just against all the war because we need more love. You know, around the world.
It's disgusting and nasty, and it doesn't deserve to be happening.
But experts in Middle Eastern studies say reaction to the strikes among Iranian Americans is more complex.
Many people are horrified and terrified. There are some people who are excited, who believe that this might be the push that the regime needs to implode.
Associate Professor Sahar Razavi directs the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center at Sacramento State. She says the reaction within Iran is similar.
Typically, what we have seen with military attacks on Iran in the past, it tends to lead to a spike in nationalist sentiment. There are also some sectors of Iranian society who are celebrating the attacks. So in a country of 92 million people, as you might expect, there is a diversity of opinions and voices, but we've already seen heavy casualties of civilians.
Regardless of reaction, everyone wants to make sure their loved ones are okay, and Razavi says for so many, that's been a challenge.
And one thing that is extremely difficult for Iranian Americans is that we have a very low success rate at getting a hold of our loved ones in Iran to see if they're okay.
From the Middle East to Northern California on Saturday, the world watching and waiting.
We are all waiting to see what happens.
And the governor's Office of Emergency Services saying it's monitoring the situation. In a social media post, OES says, quote, our Homeland Security and emergency management teams are working with federal partners to prepare for any impacts here at home. And Governor Gavin Newsom is responding to the attack, saying in part, quote, the leadership of Iran must go, but that does not justify the president of the United States engaging in an illegal, dangerous war that will risk the lives of our American service members and our friends without justification to the American people, end quote. He goes on to say he still stands with California's Iranian American community. Senator Alex Padilla echoing the governor's statement, saying on social media, quote, regardless of what the president may think or say, he does not enjoy a blank check to launch large-scale military operations without a clear strategy, without any transparency or public debate, and not without congressional approval, end quote. Some local Republican officials are also expressing support for the military operation. Assemblyman James Gallagher saying, quote, this appears to be a strategic and well-planned strike on Iran, specifically against the evil regime that oppresses the country and recently murdered 35,000 of their own citizens, end quote. He says the attack was a, quote, necessary show of strength against Iran. And following the death of Iran's supreme leader, attention now turns to what happens next and who holds power and what the ripple effects could be closer to home. And to help us make sense of it all, here with me live is Dr. Sahar Razavi, Sacramento State Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. There is a lot to unpack here. What a day.
What a day. It's been jam-packed since the moment we found out last night that the strikes had begun.
So what does this mean? I think that's the first question that people here are asking. What does this mean for us here? What does this mean for areas in the region? And what does it mean for Iran?
It's a very major turning point for Iran and for Iranians. With the confirmation of the death of the supreme leader today, a lot of people are reacting very strongly across a broad spectrum of reactions. For us here in the United States, we are going to see probably pretty far-ranging economic impacts because Iran announced several hours ago that they're closing the Strait of Hormuz. About 20 to 30% of the global oil shipping goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is going to have a pretty dramatic impact across the region, across the globe. China issued a statement a couple of weeks ago saying that any attack on China's allies was going to be considered an attack on China itself. China's top two sources of cheap oil to fuel their GDP growth, which is a very big concern for the United States, have been, in recent years, Venezuela and Iran. So I think we're going to see some reaction. China and Russia today called an Emergency Security Council hearing at the United Nations. As you know, they're both Iran's allies. I think Iranian American communities are going to be impacted. Americans are going to be beyond the economic impact. Americans who have loved ones who are service members who are probably going to be impacted. There's a lot there. There are many layers.
So many layers. And when you look at the reaction that we're seeing online, you see a diversity of opinions and reactions to this. In one scenario, you see people dancing in the street and singing praise and shooting off fireworks. And on the other hand, you see people grieving and in fear and worried about more violence that could escalate in the region. So how do you make sense of all of that?
I think the celebrations that we have seen speak to the level of pressure and misery that people have experienced in Iran for so many years. I mean, Iranian civil society has tried through basically every avenue that has been available to them to make changes to the system, and they have been foreclosed at every turn by the repressive apparatuses of the Iranian government. So the celebrations reflect a sense of relief that the supreme leader, who has been at the helm for 37 years, is gone. But there is also very, in my opinion, reasonably trepidation for what could come next for themselves and for the region. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, the strike on the girls' elementary school in southern Iran in Hormozgan killed more than 100. These are little girls, ages 7 to 12. I think people are very aware. The literacy rate in Iran and the level of education and sophistication are very high, and people are aware of what has happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. There's real concern about what's going to happen to Iran.
Is there any infrastructure in place to set up the next leader? What does that process look like? And is there anyone that is lined up to be a successor for this?
Yes. The Iranian constitution puts in place protocols for, in the event of the death, whether it's a killing like this or by natural causes, in the event of the death of the supreme leader, there is a succession plan in place. We saw reporting out of New York Times a few days ago that Khamenei himself had designated at least 3 layers of succession in the event of his assassination. He directed his top generals to designate at least 4 layers of succession for themselves. And according to the Iranian constitution, at this point, there is a small team of 3. The Iranian president, who by all reports is alive and well, the head of the judiciary, and 1 cleric from the Guardian Council, which is it's a body of 88 members. They are temporarily taking charge of the country administratively, while the successor is designated and brought to power.
So we hear President Trump say this message to the Iranian people. We're doing what you've been asking. You've been protesting in the streets. You've seen thousands of your people killed. Now is your only chance to take over. How do they do that?
To be honest, it's very unclear because the Iranian military has 2 branches. They have an official military like the Navy and the Air Force, and then they have the IRGC. And combined between those 2, there are about 600,000. And when you add in the police and other security forces like the Basij, it's almost 1 million. And with Iranian citizens being unarmed, I mean, asking them to go and take over their government institutions in the face of really overwhelming violence over the past 47 years, anytime they have tried to do so, is it's unclear how they are being expected to do that with kind of empty hands. Taking out some of the top officials, I'm sure doesn't hurt, but it doesn't present a clear path forward in the face of a system that is very entrenched and has been very entrenched and is set up to survive a war of attrition. Iranian leaders have learned a lot from the conflicts in the region, and for better or worse, for their own survival, they have tried to set it up so that Iran can militarily survive longer than what they may be expected to survive, which allows them to outlast the political will of any American president to be in a prolonged military campaign in Iran. So there could be a lot more death and destruction coming in the near future, not only for Iran and Iranians, but for other countries in the region.
Last question to you as we wrap this up. Did this start with the nuclear negotiations, and what does that mean for that moving forward?
So this round of the conflict did start with nuclear negotiations, but as you know, and I believe you've reported on yourself, President Trump had announced after the 12-day war that the United States had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities, and now they are, we're being told that they are weeks away again. So it's a little hard to navigate what exactly is the truth there, but I think the nuclear situation has presented the proper pretext for any kind of attack, whether that be preventative, preemptive, or any other kind of attack that the United States and Israel might want to carry out.
A lot of uncertainty and a lot of Iranian Americans and people across the globe trying to reach their loved ones there without success. So there's a lot to be said moving forward, and we'll be keeping a close eye and leaning on you for some analysis on where we go forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Americans are urged to leave more than a dozen Middle Eastern countries immediately. Many are finding that easier said than done. One of those people is Dima Al-Safar-Patterson, a former ABC 10 producer who moved to Dubai with her family for work just last year. And she talked with us and shares her experience.
Dubai is known for being pretty safe. And this is something that we feel every day. being here. So when this regional tension started to happen, we did not see this coming, to be quite honest with you. We did not think that all these Gulf countries were going to get hit, because the Gulf area in general is pretty safe.
Dima Al-Safar Patterson, a former ABC 10 producer, moved to Dubai with her family for work with Arabia English as a senior journalist. Amidst the rising tensions in the region, deciding to stay in Dubai or return to Sacramento may not be an easy move to make.
Right now, we are weighing the option, but we have not decided yet if we're coming back or not. So we're still kind of thinking about this, trying to see if it's worth coming back.
The U.S. State Department has urged Americans living or staying in more than a dozen Middle Eastern countries to leave immediately. This includes the United Arab Emirates, where a drone struck the U.S. consulate in Dubai. Airports in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Doha closed over the weekend after they were targeted by Iranian strikes. The Dubai airport has now resumed limited service.
We're hoping that it's not going to get worse than this, that this is it, this is the peak, and it's going to die down from there. But also we're being realistic about the fact that tensions could escalate and it could get worse and worse.
Yeah, a very scary situation. Dima says she and her family right now are weighing the options to see if they will come back to our area.
Escalating conflict involving Iran has rattled global markets, and we're starting to see the economic impacts here at home. Dr. Sahar Razavi is a political science professor at Sacramento State University and director of the Iranian and Middle East Center. Doctor, nice to have you here. You, as a young person, lived in Iran, but most of your time has been spent here in the United States. Would you say that most of Iran now is in favor of a regime change? I don't need specific percentages, but where is the general population in all this?
According to the most reliable public opinion data that we have, the vast majority of Iranians do want a fundamental change to the system. That does not necessarily translate into all being in favor of regime change from an external force. There are many different views on what the proper means and methods are to bring about a different kind of system, but they are generally, yes, in favor of a total change to what we have.
So if they are in favor of that and not necessarily in favor of war, how else would you do this based on the two ayatollahs who've been in power since '79?
This is one of the great dilemmas of Iranian society, that Iranian civil society has been struggling for many years, for many decades, to try to make changes from within the system, and they haven't worked because the state has enacted really unlimited violence and repression on them. So Iranians now feel like when all other avenues have been foreclosed, they don't really know what is left to do. At the same time, a lot of Iranians were alive for and remember the Iran-Iraq War, and they're very cognizant of the death and destruction that war brings. So there are a lot of mixed and complex emotions.
So looking at what's happening in Tehran right now, how long can Iran go with being squeezed by the U.S.? How long economically can they last?
Economically, they were already very much on the rocks and on the ropes. But the Iranian military is built for survival in a war of attrition. That they have been fortified for that type of a system and that type of an engagement. So militarily, this could last for quite some time on the Iranian side. Economically, people were already suffering very dramatically. So I'm not sure how much more economic pain people can go through. But I know they already have gone through so much that it would just be seen as a continuation of that misery economically by a lot of people.
20% of the world's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz, as you know. So when would we start to see the effect here? I mean, obviously, we're going to see a spike in gas prices, no doubt. Is there anything else the United States will feel from what's going on right now?
I think we're going to see a lot of impacts. The Strait of Hormuz is 20%, but the Iranian ally in the Houthis also control to some extent the Red Sea. So we could see not only a spike in oil prices, but also the price of many goods that get shipped in cargo ships through these different passages. This also could have significant political ramifications for us. As you know, we're ahead of the midterm elections. And I think right now, Trump sees this as a calculation for him that it would be beneficial to him to be a wartime president as the incumbent going into these elections, which he very strongly feels the GOP needs to win decisively in order to protect him from potential impeachment proceedings or even possibly removal. If we see prolonged military engagement and more service member deaths in an environment where the vast majority of Americans were already against the war before it began, when we were talking about the possibilities, then this could hurt him and shift our political landscape more than he may have anticipated.
I'm sensing from what you're saying that this regime that's been in power will fight to the death, never mind the economic impacts on this, yes?
It's the current iteration of the conflict is very much an existential threat for the regime. They have made clear that if they are going down, they are going to make it as painful as possible for all of the U.S. allies and assets in the region. And they are putting pressure on Gulf states to try to make some kind of a backdoor deal with Trump to try to bring this to an end.
Such as Dubai and UAE.
That's right.
Yes, okay. Doctor, thank you for joining us today.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
your insight.
Anytime.
All right, now to the latest on the conflict with Iran. The U.S. is urging Americans to leave more than a dozen Mideast countries amid the conflict. It's also mandating the departure of some non-emergency government personnel. They include those in Jordan, Bahrain, Iraq, Qatar, and Kuwait. And the State Department says citizens struggling to leave can call in for help. This as the president maintains that Iran is a threat and military operations in the region will continue for at least several more weeks. We're joined now by Professor Jamie Jackson from Sacramento State. Professor, so glad you're here with us today. I know you've got some perspective. We're trying to figure out for the Americans who are trapped in the area, and that's now expanded right to Doha, to Qatar, to Bahrain, and certainly to other places here. You can speak to the conflict and about State Department getting people out.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very serious challenge, and this isn't obviously the first time the United States has had to withdraw non-emergency personnel from embassies. It's a common response in situations where there's a direct fear that any American citizens on the ground could be harmed by the ensuing conflict. The challenge that's occurring right now is because of the escalation, there are a number of airports that are being targeted and bombed. We already know an embassy in Saudi Arabia was bombed. Thankfully, folks were able to get out in time before that occurred. And so being able to evacuate in these contexts is extremely complicated, extremely difficult, and requires us to rely very heavily on on-the-ground intelligence from our allies, where we can get as much information as possible to smoothly get people exited out of these conflict zones.
You've done some field work in Lebanon. Based on what you know now, can you speak to our involvement currently on the ground in Iran and possible your thoughts about motivations for us doing this?
Yeah, I mean, if you go based on what we're hearing from President Trump, the initial starting conversation around a buildup of military action in Iran was focused more on a response to Iranians' treatment of its own people and the protests that were happening in Iran. But very, very quickly, he pivoted to speaking specifically about Iran nuclear deal. And if we think back to his first administration, this was unfinished business for Trump's administration, was the Iran nuclear deal. So these activities in Iran, which are targeting the domestic populace that has been protesting the current regime, were really an opening for the United States to sort of step in and use it as an opening to push the issue of the Iran nuclear deal.
Okay, let me ask you this before we leave here. How long can Iran go with this? Because we've hit a lot of their installations. They don't have much in terms of infrastructure or food. Will they fight to the bitter end here?
I think we shouldn't underestimate Iran's resolve. I mean, I think it's extremely difficult to know how long these things will play out. Both the U.S. and Israel have two of the largest and most well-resourced militaries on the planet. So I think it's going to be a major challenge for Iran to hold on in a protracted conflict.
How long would you assume they can hold on?
I don't want to say because honestly, I'm not sure. But I do think that We also need to understand that all of the resources of Iran tend to be held by very few, those that are loyal to the regime,
Right.
and they will mobilize those resources to engage in as protracted a conflict as possible.
Okay. Professor, we appreciate you. Jamie Jackson, Sac State. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. David Anderson Rogers joins us now, political science professor at Sacramento State. Doctor, good. I'm glad you're here with us today.
Thank you.
How serious has this become when we have a U.S. submarine torpedoing an Iranian warship? I never thought I would say that. Where are we with this conflict at this point?
Well, obviously, it's expanded broadly. The United States and Israel are carrying out massive joint operations against Iran's entire military infrastructure, and so, it decided to attack an Iranian vessel that was 2,000 miles away from Tehran.
Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that out. What would an Iranian vessel be doing in the Sri Lanka area?
It was participating in the International Fleet celebration that was taking place in India. And so that had taken place just a few days ago. The United States participated in it as well. In fact, ironically, the United States participated in joint anti-submarine exercises during it, and it's a large international sort of display of naval vessels.
Okay.
So it was coming back from that. What it was, what they were planning on doing, I don't think anyone has any idea.
Right.
Obviously, their country came under attack before when they were leaving, but it wasn't there for any bad purposes.
Okay. How wide do you see this going? I mean, obviously, Iran has retaliated on some countries that were nearby that really were trying to sit this out. How wide do you see this going if this keeps going longer?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to go as long as the United States and Israel want it to go. They have, obvious military superiority over Iran. Even with Iran's very kind of scattershot approach as a response, you're not seeing the type of military damage to the places they're targeting in the way that the United States is carrying out military damage against Iran. But that said, we're blowing up things is easy. What happens next is anyone's guess. And
well, let me have you guess that. If you're Iran, how long do you want to do this? Because you've been basically had most of what you can do.
Well, Iran doesn't want to do this at all. I mean,
but in terms of fighting,
they were attacked.
Exactly. Not beefing that at all.
Yeah.
I'm saying if you are them, you know that it's just going to keep getting more escalation on top of them.
Well,
they are pretty restricted in what they can do versus this giant force.
Well, I mean, they've certainly. I think just today there was reports that they had sent out feelers to try to come to some kind of negotiated agreement with the United States to stop it, and Israel to stop it. I mean, they clearly want to not be attacked by the United States and Israel. But I haven't seen anything from the United States side or Israel side that would indicate what Iran can do to get them to stop.
Right.
So
other than say, let's knock this off, go to the table right now, and we'll stop everything we're doing.
No, I don't think that. I mean, the United States and Israel are their purpose right now is to completely destroy Iran's military structure. And I think, Iran, there's nothing Iran can say or do at this point that I think will get Israel or the United States to stop.
That's important to hear that. Yeah. All right, Dr. David Anderson Rogers, thank you for your
time.
All
right, thank you.
Appreciate you.
Their purpose right now is to completely destroy Iran's military